Okay, welcome. I'm here with Richard Burke to talk about burnout. I've been burnt out. I know you've been burnt out. I'm not saying that about you, Richard, but I know that most people that we encounter have experienced some form of burnout. I've been pretty open and transparent, writing full articles about moments that I've been burnt out. And strangely, a lot of people gravitate to me when I say that. And so, Richard, you are an expert in this topic. Why don't you give us a minute or two about who you are and how you came to burnout as a topic?
I have been working in conflict resolution one way or another for just about 40 years. 4 years of that, I was an assistant DA. I was making conflict or dealing with conflict in a very adversarial way. But for the last 36, as a combination of working for the world's largest private dispute resolution service provider for a little more than a decade and about 25 years as an academic, all talking about mediation, negotiation, arbitration, and how to resolve disputes effectively, efficiently at the lowest possible level. I get brought into a lot of organizations, and I like to say that similar to a lot that happens in the law, the presenting problem is not usually the actual problem, right? So sometimes you read a law case and it's about refining some particular piece of law, but really the underlying complaint that brought somebody to a lawyer in the first place had nothing to do with refining the law. It had to do with the human problem that they couldn't resolve. When I get brought into a company or an organization, often they say, we're having an issue with this, or we need to make this kind of decision. And then I interview people and I find that there's human stuff going on that has, like, my favorite example I was telling you about, there was a case in California where people in an apartment had holes in the roof and rats, and it was very substandard housing. And then they filed a lawsuit against the landlord, and then the landlord filed a lawsuit back. And there's something called a strategic lawsuit against public participation. So if it's called a SLAP action. And it's basically when somebody, like the landlord, was filing a disingenuous lawsuit, right? It wasn't real. He wasn't really suing the tenants. He just wanted to countersue the tenants to make them back off. And so he didn't want them to participate. So he was trying to get them to back off. And eventually, the rules of who could file a SLAP lawsuit, who had standing to file a SLAP lawsuit, it went up and down the California Supreme Court a bunch of different times. It took 10 years, and eventually they said you have standing to file the claim. And I imagine that when the Court of Appeals sent out those paper versions of the lawsuit, that the tenants took them and they stuffed them in the roof to block the rain, and they stuffed them in the rat holes to block the rats, because they really weren't there in the first place to take care of refining SLAP lawsuit standing issues. They were there to solve a human problem. So when I go into a company, they say things like, we're going to have an organizational retreat and we want to make sure that the following things occur. And I say, great, can I interview some of the people who are going to attend? And if it's going to be like folks from 3 divisions, I insist on it. They always let me in
Oh, they do? They let
advance.
you? Good.
Yeah, I won't do it otherwise.
Great.
I tell people I'm
So
not
then,
going
so
to
then
go.
you start talking to them, and then you realize that they're like not excited about the retreat, and they're like, "I'm not going to do a trust fall, and everything's not going to get better because the day I get back from that retreat, the same pile of shit is going to be on my desk."
Exactly right. They're like, what is this for? And I'm like, let me tell you something. I am not there just to spend a day and get paid. I am there to try to do something that is going to be transformative. And so tell me what's going on. And so that's when they start to talk to me about things like, I don't trust my boss. We're feeling a lot of pressure. And so they start to reveal issues with difficult colleagues, peers that get promoted to supervisor and are now no longer available in the same way. Often people at work, I'll say for the most part, they focus on the nouns and they ignore the verbs, right? They're trying to produce a widget and they forget that they're dealing with people. And often the people who produce the most widgets, the most efficiently, get promoted to be the manager of the people producing widgets. And
Yeah,
so
but just because you're good at producing widgets doesn't mean you're a good manager.
it usually means that you're probably not a trained manager.
There's a totally different mindset of I'm going to
Totally different.
take orders and do things, or I'm going to lead and create an environment that reduces conflict or whatever it may be, or I have to manage budgets or varying competing problems.
Sure. I was in academia for a long time. It's like, boy,
No,
you
you
write a
experienced
lot of,
that. I've had my share of being a part of, I've been an adjunct in 5 different institutions, and I have seen that dysfunction from the ground up, and I've called it out too.
oh yeah,
I'm going to talk a little bit about burnout in academia. It's funny
that's a big one.
because I literally am totally comfortable with doing this. At Sacred Heart University, where I last taught, I taught there for 5 years. It was in January, and I was preparing for the next semester. And I got a call from the bookstore, and they said, Professor Mandel, you're no longer listed as the professor for the class. And then I wrote the department chairperson, and I said, hey, department chairperson, there must be some miscommunication here because I don't see myself on the register. And he said, I'll be in touch and we'll talk about it. I've been waiting for 3 years for that conversation. But in the meantime, I'm on LinkedIn and I watch Professor Dan Taylor and Mike Frechette. They wrote an academic research paper about burnout.
Yeah, I bet.
And I said to him in the comment, the first comment that was written on that was mine. And not a lot of people liked it, but a lot of people looked at it. I saw because he was posting it to say, oh, I'm so great. And he was like saying, oh, you could have walking meetings and you need to breathe and you need to do this. And I said, you're not allowed to talk about burnout at work when you treat your staff like this. Keep in mind that in those 5 years of teaching, I taught 2-3 classes a semester. Many of the people that graduated from that program, I was the highlight. And I was getting paid $5,000 a class. Yeah. And I put all of that on my shoulder, creating new curriculum, bringing forward new ideas. At that point, I also had written a book, my book, Brand Strategy in 3 Steps. And I said, I am a professor at your institution, and I have this book. Marketing professor, head of department. What do you want to do about that? Nothing. Like I met with the guy, nothing. And this reminds me of when we talk about burnout related to what you were talking about. SLAP also reminds me of that. It's really interesting because as a well-intended part of a system who was trying to teach marketing in a way that was, from my experience as a professional, I have some very valid insights that some students swear by. Some students hate me because I literally expected way too much from students. For some students, but for the students that really were into their craft, having a professor like me was amazing. And so getting back to, okay, we're talking about burnout. At the end of the day, it all worked out for me. I went to another university, and I'm doing my own thing, all that stuff. But when you look at employees in a system and they have an experience like I had as an adjunct professor, what the hell am I supposed to do if I wanted to be content being an adjunct professor? Richard, is it all about just letting go of any sort of expectation of any decorum or reciprocity or standards that I hold for myself? Or is there some other better way to deal with burnout?
So great management can do a lot to create a sense of belonging and a sense of engagement with the mission. And if they do create that sense of belonging and engagement with the mission, they communicate with you differently. And so that's a great burnout preventer. Now, obviously, if you think about what happened to you, you brought all this energy, you brought all this enthusiasm, you were ready to go. And the folks a level or two above you didn't reward that, didn't acknowledge it, didn't give you any human feedback in a way that would sustain you. And so I think burnout comes I think most people think burnout comes from overwork. And I don't think that's true.
You started
Right?
talking about peeling back the onion, or you didn't say that. I know a boss of mine
Mhm.
used to say peel back the onion, but you started to say that the issue that was presented is normally not the issue that it is. So in my situation, I have taken psychological assessments. I work with this company called Agile Brain, and it gives you deep
Yep. Oh yeah.
psychographic
Uh-huh.
stuff. And need for recognition is core to my being. I need that. I need that. It doesn't have to be over the top, but at least acknowledgement of, and I also have spent a lot of time digging into this thing. I've listened to Scott Galloway,
Yep.
who is the NYU professor, and he basically said that academia as we know it could potentially go away. Like the big ones like Harvard and they'll be fine. But
Yeah, they'll be around.
the middle of the road, for example, my university, Syracuse, where I went to undergraduate, is announcing a tremendous cutting of majors and
Cutting.
programs.
Yeah.
And I believe systematically that a university that is charging 30, 40, $50,000 a year for a student to come in is under tremendous pressure to pay the expenses, is under tremendous pressure from the government because they've interjected with things that take away money. Students are realizing that I could be a mechanic and make more money than being a marketing professional,
Yep.
which is totally a valid career that may have been frowned upon in my parents' generation, or at least by my white collar parents. My
Sure.
parents wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, or this and that. And so we're seeing this tremendous shift, but who's losing? The students are losing and
Yeah.
the professors are losing. Like the people that are the representatives of your institution are all feeling like, wow, I'm going into debt in order to go to college. I'm not getting a job at the end of school that will make up that debt in a reasonable amount of time. If I do get a job, I'm scared about AI and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So we're
Yep.
laying out all this environmental stuff that basically shits on the people that should be the heroes of the story.
Yeah, that in education for sure. In higher ed, when we talk about people getting promoted, it's, oh, you write a lot of really good law art review articles on a very esoteric subject. You should be a dean.
Oh, that's the worst thing you could possibly do, because then when you're the dean, then you have to deal with all the discipline, you have to deal with the fundraising, and then you get away from the academic reason why you came.
The thing that you're good at. That's right.
Yes.
You stop doing the thing that you're good at. I know folks in departments of surgery around the country because I've done a lot of work in the healthcare industry. And it's, boy, you're a super efficient surgeon. Let's take you out of the operatory and make you the director of a department. And by the way, we're not going to stop and give you any training on human behavior. We're not going to talk about the skills of a mediator, facilitating good meetings. We're just going to basically throw you in. And like a lot of professors, they end up teaching to themselves, right? Like a professor has to learn, oh, my students aren't like me. But they start out by presumptively teaching the way that they wish they had been taught. We parent the way we wish we had been parented. We manage the way we wish we had been managed. But that's unique to us. That's not necessarily the skill for when you think about empathy and the skills of a good manager. They're not teaching to themselves as the audience. They're starting out with the humility to say, I don't really understand my audience. And so job one is let me understand the people that I'm working with. And when you talk about that idea of how alienated and disenfranchised you felt, I'm going to recommend just a fabulous book. A guy named Jeffrey with a G Cohen at Stanford, a Stanford psychologist, wrote a book called Belonging. And it starts with this incredible story of this interview with a guy who is the second generation imperial wizard of the clan. Dad was a wizard, and now the kid is a wizard, and now he's being interviewed, and he has all these horrible racist and sexist and just every kind of aberrant belief that you could imagine. And at some point, the town that he's in invites him to be part of an anti-racism council. And he says, what am I doing there? And they said, we really feel like we need to reach out and understand the perspectives of people that don't think like us. So we'd like to have you there. They didn't say this. I'm just going to say he was the subject matter expert. And
That sounds like an Ali G punk thing. Like,
it's right. It sounds like a joke.
yeah,
But this is the intro to this, like I said, this
but that's the
fabulous
intro
book
to the
called
book. Okay,
Belonging.
that's
And then
a
what happens though is this grand wizard starts to become friends with the people on the council. And then he does this deep revisitation of his own life. And he comes to the conclusion that he's actually not racist. He just enjoyed the meetings and the camaraderie, attended to the meetings, and the people all had a purpose and a mission, and he felt wrapped up in that. But when he went to the anti-racism council and he's now starting to interact with people in the town, he found that he liked them better and he had a sense of belonging. And the sort of punchline of the intro of the story is, in order to feel a sense of community and belonging, that basic human need, people will engage in sometimes very aberrant behavior.
how did he know any better if that was how he was raised?
Exactly. And so when you think about the workplace, the modern workplace, people who don't feel connected to the levels above them in the way that in your story you felt completely disconnected, completely disrespected. And that's a pretty remarkable horror story to be told. You're not teaching and I'll get back to you, and then 3 years later, whatever, crickets chirping. Talk about feeling disengaged. Who are you going to rally with? You're going to rally with other disaffected adjuncts, right? You're going to find your sense of belonging, and it's
Right.
not
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
necessarily
yeah.
going to be
Or I am going to create a movement that directly, and so I wrote that book, Brand Strategy in 3 Steps. At the end of that book, it said you need a movement to rally around. So it aligns with this belonging advice. And at the end of that book, I had not started the Marketing Accountability Council. Once I started the Marketing Accountability Council, I meet with it's gone ebb and flow, but every Monday I meet with the core group of marketers who have the same worldview as me, but we are allowed to disagree. And every time we disagree kindly, with respect for each other, and we end up laughing.
Yeah.
In the startup that I'm building, the Clean Data Alliance, the same thing happens. We have some ideas about what's good, what's right, what we should focus on, and we don't always agree, but we always leave with respect and clarity. But in my upbringing, in my previous life before, I was filled with people that you weren't allowed to disagree with, and you needed to fall into line.
Right.
And the truth is that I'm done with that. And so the experience that I am having, the renaissance that I am having as a professional, is a direct connection to, and by the way, this is not new stuff. This has been written about in all of my stuff over years. I have realized that the reason why I am, and funny enough, Richard, my therapist's name is Richard, so it's throwing me off a little bit. And I literally talked about it today in my therapy. I talked to Richard about the fact that what I am building, there's a bridge between where the world is today as in the field of marketing and where I see it being. Where the world is today with clean data and where I envision it being. And there's a gap between it. And I realize that my psychology, what I need is to feel a little bit of a sense of, I don't want to participate in systems that are not going to give me satisfaction too good to be true. I want to participate in a system that I, from all of my experience, am creating. And so the Marketing Accountability Council and the Clean Data Alliance, both things that I have founded, are following those principles related to past work experience, past life experience, past relationships that didn't work, and what I've learned from them.
Tell me a little bit more about the company.
The company, the Clean Data Alliance, is a 501c6, and we are also working towards a for-profit company. But clean data is 4 things. And this goes to respect. It's given with permission. It's anonymous. It is, and there's a value exchange between the person who's giving the data and the person who is taking the data. And then the final thing is it's longitudinal, meaning it's collected over time. So if I give you an Agile Brain survey today, it doesn't mean that you're going to get the same result tomorrow. And if you look at the world that we live in today, none of those principles are common practice. It seems like basic manners here. Hey, it's funny. I filmed 2 recordings today. The other recording I filmed was with a guy who is an outreach prospecting guy. And I challenged him and I said to him, okay, I have the Clean Data Alliance and these are our 4 principles. How could I work with your company? And he was unable to, like, you cannot interrupt someone. I cannot insert myself into your inbox to promote the Clean Data Alliance if it goes against principle number 1, which is permissioned. I have no permission to get into your inbox. The field of marketing in and of itself is filled with things like that, where it's, I didn't invite you. I bought an iced coffee, and now all of a sudden I'm getting 12 emails on how to sip my iced coffee. Yep. I don't want it. I don't want to delete it. I'm missing emails that I would normally see because it's filled with junk. I don't even know if there's any value in having email anymore. So do you see the connection here? We have literally the Marketing Accountability Council that I started. We had 4 meetings right around this time last year. We met with 4 experts on data privacy. And that was what stimulated my co-founder and I to start the Clean Data Alliance and to build this whole ecosystem. And we're at a stage right now, Richard, and I swear to God, this is really satisfying for me, where we're raising money. Like, we are raising millions of dollars. We are partnered with the right people. We have the pitch deck. We've raised $170,000 from friends and family. And now we're at the stage where we are working within the startup world to do this and do it right. And it literally, I gave you the bridge from writing the book to starting the Mac to participating in the Marketing Accountability Council and realizing that there's something here. I invited my co-founder to my classroom when I was teaching at Fairfield, and I present our idea to the students. I put them on the spot. It was a pivotal moment. And then fast forward to a year later, and now we're raising money, like really raising money.
Well, it's a hugely important effort. Right now, if you and I start talking about maybe we're going to talk about shopping for our daughters for clothing, and we start talking about maybe they want a flower print red dress. Just by my saying that now,
you're going to get an ad.
I'm going to get some ads for
Google is behind this.
Yeah. And so it is all about the push. Another thing that you're saying that's really interesting to me is the idea of how motivating it is to work toward a vision.
Yes.
And there's various people. I think you and I might share that sense of, I see things that don't exist that should exist, and then my job is to figure out how to get from here to there. I work with somebody who is, let's just say, maybe a little less interested in crafting visions, doesn't trust her visioning ability quite the same, but she can execute in a detail-oriented way and fill in gaps in a way that I just can't.
Yes, right? I feel the same way, and I have partners that do that. And that's the great thing, because as a startup person for 7 years, trying to do Jay Mandel, your brand coach, I declared the end of that era, because the idea that I could sell in, that I could deliver, that I can write, craft, keep customers happy wasn't possible. Now I have a team of people. And in addition to the founders, we have a good dozen people who have raised their hand, haven't been compensated a cent, who are so interested in what we're doing that they are volunteering their expertise, their time, and showing up over and over. How does that happen?
And so when the mythology that burnout is a result of overwork, I will say in some realms, it's shocking to me that we had to go from 100-hour week for medical residents down to an 80-hour week at a time when accountants and some business people are often making the most more than the surgeons and doctors are making. They may be burnt out from overwork because a lot of them
Well,
still
yeah,
feel
I mean,
very,
imagine seeing that trauma over and over again.
yeah, and just sheerly the number of work hours. But I know people who are working 80 hours a week and it gives them energy.
Yes,
Right.
I'm one of them because I know that my work is all for a good reason now. And I also know that if it's not successful, I'm in big trouble because let's talk about burnout and systems. Like all these
Yep.
people say to me, Jay, including, you know, like they basically say to me, Jay, why don't you get a job? Why do you laugh? No, I know why you laugh. I'm like, and I'm 48 years old. I worked at MasterCard, made hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, got the bonus, this and that. I look at the profile of the people that are working there. And what happens is people last 7 years there. You start off in your 20s and you work your way up. They promote you 2, 3, 4 times. And when you start to get more expensive, just like what Oracle did with their people, they use the AI. I read something that they use the AI to figure out how much they're going to have to pay out in stock options. And they wanted to cut the bleeding. And I just feel like the economy that we're living in, who wants someone as opinionated as me that understands exactly how this system works? I don't want to be boxed into that. But I also, if I were an employer looking at me, I think that like what you do, I do what you do. I go into companies, I look at what's going on. I try and uncover things that are not necessarily the hard skill, the soft reasons why this isn't happening. But Richard, how do we, okay, so you go in and you do one of those day things where you're really trying to get to the truth. How do you tie a bow on it and claim victory? What are the steps to, okay, you've identified that it's very clear. I can identify burnout, why there's burnout, but what's the remediation or what's the positive way to shift a culture that is just totally wrong to a culture that is productive and valuable for all players?
It doesn't happen in an offsite in a day.
I know that.
So let's just start there. That usually I internally I joke with a couple of colleagues and I say, "Oh, we got a paid audition."
So they're basically paying you. And so if one of the managers looks at it and says, "Oh, I see this and I've identified this," then they're going to reach out to you and say, "What do I do about it?"
So I said I do a lot of interviews in advance of doing any kind of work. If it's a few hours or something that's going to be a week, I want to know who my attendees are. I want to know what they know, how they define the issue. And so I'm already talking with the person who hired me and saying, I'm going to have confidential conversations. And so I'm going to find out things. And chances are the way you've defined the problem is going to be different than the way the problem really looks to the people that you're working with. So just be ready for me to come back and change the scope of work. So just be ready for that. I'm going to do a conflict assessment and I'm not going to take your word for what it is, but I'm going to start with that presumption. When we do big public policy meetings, people typically, they have to organize the first group, but I assume that the first group they organize is biased in some way. And so the first meeting is called correct the membership. And so I tell the people that they've assembled, who's not here that's going to tank this when we think we've come up with something beautiful. And then somebody's going to say, I didn't participate, so I'm taking this down. And so a lot of times what happens is I'm making a relationship that is challenging for the person who hired me, which is often not what they want when they hire somebody to bring. I thought you were supposed to dampen conflict. And I tell them, look, I live in Oregon. If you cut the head off a dandelion, you just sent all the energy into the roots. You're just going to have more robust, bigger dandelions soon. You got to dig the whole thing up. And, it's going to be ugly and it's going to be harder than you thought. So if you want me to
what's the incentive for a leader, understanding that a lot of these companies shift jobs every 3 years? What's the incentive for a leader to solve that problem at that level? Let's imagine you're not going to the CEO, you're not going to the executive vice president, you're going to 3 or 4 levels down. in a department?
Okay, so a couple things is one is that they want to win, right? When I'll ask them, I'm going to take a little side trip for a
Okay.
moment. When I was a professor, I got asked by one of the largest insurance companies in the world to help teach some of their high-level adjusters to participate more effectively in mediation. And so
Okay.
we were doing courses in mediation advocacy. And before I took the job, I said, how do you people get compensated and reviewed? And they were quizzical. They were like, Professor, we're bringing you in to teach mediation advocacy, not to talk to us about finance and HR. Why do you want to know that? And
Incentives.
and I said, because I don't really have any interest in wasting my time or your money or the money of the people, the time and money of the people assembled. Because the big cost is not hiring the speaker or the consultant, it's shutting the division down for a day. So
Right.
getting and paying everybody. And so I said, look, if you're speaking to them in terms of like how they get reviewed and how they get raises, that voice is so loud that nothing I say that contradicts it is going to matter at all. No matter how true it is, no matter how good of an idea it is. And in fact, if I come in and say something that is antithetical to the way you're doing business now in an effort to change it, and then it doesn't get rewarded, in fact, it gets punished, then they're going to resent you more because your paid consultant came in and said you need to do things differently and you're not doing them differently. So I'm just that's how it starts, right? And I'm
Mhm.
not taking a job if somebody tells me, nope, not allowed. We just come in,
Stay
pull
in
out
your
the
lane.
canned speech, stay in your lane. I'm like, I don't really have a lane. I don't have an envelope. I don't have a box. I'm just gonna call things the way I see them. And if you don't want that, then I'm totally the wrong person for you. So that's how it starts, right? So that's how it starts. I'm already basically saying, without saying it, you are going to get treated in this process as well. You're
You're
going to be,
employing one of my core values, radical candor, care personally, challenge directly. You are coming in and you are making it clear that you're not going to sugarcoat stuff and you're going to say what you need to say. And that's why you're getting paid what you're getting paid.
and I need to find out what it is. And I usually say, give me your most cantankerous people because I want to turn that. They have a lot of energy. One of the things I've learned about 4 decades in conflict, people don't get into conflict about things they don't care about. I guess some do, but if they find it entertaining to be contrarian, but that's a very small, typically people only have energy around things that matter to them. And so I want to talk to the energized people, even if they're uncomfortable. And so I'll then have my interviews and they'll start telling me all the things that are wrong with the company. So getting back to why would a manager who's going to get moved somewhere in 3 years or maybe have this job for just a little while, I ask the same questions that I asked of the insurance company. How are you going to get reviewed and what matters to you and what does a win look like to you? So if we do this at the end of the day and I want you to feel like you're a total fan and you're going to now spread the word about this service because it is a unique service. What we do is not, it's very different than traditional dispute resolution, which is a fully fleshed out dispute and you're just coming in and putting it, looking at the options and trying to put an end to it. So would you rather go to trial or would you rather take this amount of money on the table? We see that. You said you were divorced. I don't know if you had kids
I
when
mean,
you were divorced.
you're bringing up stuff that I have flat out experienced in my life. I have worked against the system that has basically isolated my autistic son's problem as something that he needs to fix. And he doesn't need to fix it. I have gone up against therapists that have treated individuals, my children, and I have told them that, are you looking at the whole system, the whole family? Oh, this is individual therapy. Hey, dummy, how the hell did, just like you told me about the racist person, how do you think my daughter or my son learned to behave the way that they're behaving? They're like, this is individual therapy, get family therapy. So how many kinds of therapy could, and then every one of these therapies, like I look at the elbow, I look at the thumb, I
Oh
look at this,
gosh, yeah.
and it's all expensive. And I have worked in the system and I have filed complaints with New York State about a therapist that literally was so incompetent that when warning signs were being raised and I was raising them, she just missed all the signs and just allowed a really bad thing to happen. And then you go to New York State and you're like, oh, I'm going to complain about this. And you believe it or not, Texas has a system where you file a complaint. California has a system, you file a complaint, you get a record of it. In New York, they tell you to print out a form. They tell you to figure out which municipality you need to file to. Then they tell you to put it in the mailbox. So when I wrote an article about this, so I put it in the mailbox, and then 6 months later, I'm like, where is my complaint? And then I complained to the person who's in charge, and I'm like, and by the way, your system that I'm complaining about, the other system, is worse than the system I'm complaining about. And then the guy just selectively ignored what I was saying to him, because it's like, my job is just to deal with all the TPS reports that come in. But you're the one that wrote the note to me. So you're telling me that you're the person in charge of this whole division, and it's 2026, and it's very easy to come up with a system that says, I can accept something online, I can assign it to the right person. Like, this is baseline stuff.
Easy, trackable. Yeah.
So like, how does that happen? And why are taxes so high?
I think as a country, we evolved our business model out of the Henry Ford assembly line, where each person on the line, in order to be as efficient as possible, tightened one nut.
Yes.
And they became experts at tightening like nut 612B. And we thought, yeah, that's right. I'm super good at that quarter turn to the right. And so there was this ethos that was like, oh, specialization is everything. We don't want generalists. It was like a generalist lawyer is not going to survive. A generalist doctor, maybe in a small town, can hang out a shingle. But things have gotten so complicated that we've now taken specialization a little bit overboard, right? And so this individual my job is to open the envelope, but not to. Now, this isn't a new thing, right? This isn't a new thing. If you know the Russian author Gogol, he wrote a short story called The Overcoat, and the main character only translates, he's a translator, but he can only translate one letter, and he's assigned one letter because they don't want the translators to know the secret information, and so they only give him. It's absurd, right? It's a farce. He's now talking about the Russian bureaucracy of the 1920s, where they were already basically saying, you can't know anything outside of this one letter. Your job is to translate the letter J and nothing else, and don't look at the adjacent letters, and don't know anything about what's going on. And so you want to talk about a recipe for burnout? Give somebody work where they don't have any understanding of how it's connected to the bigger picture. You're going to isolate their sense of belonging, and we're just not evolved for that. When I graduated law school in 1986, some of the precious jobs that paid the most money were for folks who were doing discovery, and back then it was all paper.
Right.
And you sat in windowless rooms and you looked through bankers' boxes of paper trying to find evidence of some little tiny thing. And you had no idea, you never met the client, and you had no idea whether this piece of litigation meant anything to them or not, and how it fit into corporate strategy. And so I became an assistant DA in a very busy county. So we knew exactly what was going on because there was more than enough product for supply and demand. There was plenty of supply.
Sure. And then so when you select what you're going to prosecute, it is based on the level it rises up to and what sort of precedent that it can establish.
Okay, no, so we're conflating feds and state. Federal prosecutors have discretion. Federal prosecutors have discretion. They decide what they're going to prosecute in a big way. And so entirely different. So on the federal level, you can see we shift from working on organized crime to working on drugs to working on terrorism to working on whatever the Attorney General of the United States decides is a priority. Now, your local prosecutors, so if you're in Kings County in Manhattan, whatever the police arrest the night before, you have an obligation under the Constitution to do something with.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, you can theoretically dismiss things, but you got reporters in the crowd. So if you are dismissing
They're trying to keep you accountable.
yeah, because if you're just dismissing all the drunk driving cases against white men who are in roughly your age and you are prosecuting like crazy everybody else, that's going to be in the newspapers in the next day. So there is some accountability. So we had a sense of clarity around our mission in our office. And I felt a sense of connection. Now, the work was hard. It was full of trauma. It was a job that eventually led to burnout, but it wasn't soul sucking in the same way. Like I understood very directly. First, the first learning that I had was I thought I was going to be a prosecutor, and then I realized I'm a social servant because the number of things that are alcohol or drug related, and you say, okay, we don't have enough beds, we don't have enough resources. Some people need to be isolated from society because they're dangerous. Other people, there's a there, but for the grace of God, go I kind of situation. But my first law job, I felt very connected. And my peers who were making 3 and 4 times the money I was making, and I couldn't get those jobs because I didn't do the right things in law school to get those kind of jobs. My peers were becoming alcoholic. They were just saying, it's like, I spent 15 hours today in a windowless room with a banker's box by myself looking at paper. And then I drafted a memo. And when I drafted the memo, I was told, great, this is a good memo. Cancel your weekend. We want you to work Saturday and Sunday. We need to produce something by Monday.
So then it pisses off the family too.
And then, of course, and then next thing you know, that case settles in mediation, and the person who spent weeks in the basement looking at boxes doesn't know that it's settled, just is told, okay, that case is done. And you have no connection.
Yeah.
And so that's that. And it's the job of management, I think, to make people understand their connection. So now I'm going to speak a little bit about my company. I'm going to be very
Yeah, no, this is good
that.
because we need to, we'll take it home because I really want to know. We've talked about a lot of interesting stuff, but I really would like you to take it home. Tell me what your company does and how your company can really help people to do that.
Okay, so JAMS, which once upon a time stood for Judicial Arbitration and Mediation Services, we resolve about 21,500 cases a year, typically pretty lofty stuff, everything from big fires in California to pharmaceutical cases to stuff that you've in front page of the paper kind of stuff, front page of the business section. Smaller things too, right? We do a straightforward, an individual got discriminated against, and we do an employment law mediation. So traditional, like I say, traditional dispute resolution, and we are the largest full service private service provider in the world doing that, involves like either the threat of a lawsuit or a filed lawsuit, and we wrap it up and resolve it. Now, my thesis, what's been going on for me in my career, has been that that's a little bit, it's not proactive enough for me. We get in late. We get in after a problem is kind
after the damage has been done.
Yeah, after your yard is full of blackberry and dandelions, and we're supposed to come in and do something about that. And every mediator I know has had this moment where they say, if you would have called me in 6 months ago, I could have saved you a lot of time and money. And so now we have started a separate division called JAMS Pathways. And the idea is it doesn't need to be a filed piece of litigation. It should probably be intra-organizational because you'd never want like one arm of a company suing another arm. You don't want one part of a hospital suing another part. I mean, these are internal nonprofit boards. You want these organizations to work really well. And so I started unbundling what it takes to be a good dispute resolver. And a little bit of economics, right? Basic, it's like, how do you get the most of what you want? How do you understand risk? How do you understand future value? A lot of psychology, a lot of cognitive behavioral psychology, because one of the things we may be dealing with very different disputes, but we're always dealing with humans. And so understanding how that works. Interpersonal communication is huge. A little bit of understanding of the law. I draw from game theory because the basic set of the strategy of am I working with or against this person and how do I maximize my outcome? Am I better off being cooperative or not? There's some cross-cultural studies. There's some work in what I call process design, because often things don't happen in one meeting. And you need to be thinking in terms of like, how's this going to play out over the next 6 months? Returning to a theme that we brought up earlier, I have that first on-site. I have my meeting with the person who hires me. I do my interviews. I have the on-site day, and I'm using examples from people's desks, and they're seeing that I have a sense of how to help them solve problems. And then somebody comes in and says, okay, so we have this bigger problem that we really didn't want to tell you about until we knew you.
Yeah.
But now that you see it, and now that you've demonstrated to us that you're trustworthy and you can help, let's talk about making this better. And so a lot of what happens at Pathways is people will bring us in for a training, like they'll bring us in for a day, but really what they're doing is they're getting to know us. And when they get to know us, they see we're pretty intrusive. We want to get to the root of things. And we do a pretty thorough diagnosis to say, okay, you brought your car and we put it up on the rack. You don't need to hire us to fix it. But but wherever you go, here are the problems that we see with your car, and here is what it would take for us to do it and how much it would cost. And again, you're under no obligation. You can take the car down. You don't need to fix it. I'm not gonna make you feel guilty. Like, you can let this go, you can let it fall. This car can rust, your company can, this division can wither. That's all your call. I don't, but if you want to do it, I'm going to give you my honest advice about what it takes. And if we're too expensive for you, I'll help you find a cheaper option somewhere else, because I want to demonstrate to them, if they want to do the right thing, I care about them getting the right thing done.
Yes.
And so what we've done is we've taken the basic skill set that's being used in mediation and arbitration, we've disassembled it, and now we can reassemble it based on the needs of a client or a company or an organization. And so that's our unique value proposition, that we come in and we really say, I talked about being working with folks in the medical profession. A lot of what we do is very similar. A patient comes in and says, I have some symptoms. I think I have this. And they're like, no, actually, your arm is broken. It's not about the way you're moving your finger. We've done a little more. So here's what the treatment's going to look like. And maybe we have a hypothesis, because sometimes it's not as clear. An x-ray can reveal a broken arm, but if you're talking about reflux or you're talking about things that are in the gut or the biome, those things are a little bit more elusive, right? You're going to need to have a longer period of observation and testing. So our work is very similar to that. We don't come in and say, oh, we've got a solution, and no matter what your problem is, we're going to do this 1, 2, 3 method, and it's all going to work.
That I guess it comes down to what sells in marketing is all the people that say you could have the key to the quick fix. That I fully buy into everything you're saying. Not only buy into
how do you sell that?
That's what's been the hard part for me. Like,
that's the hard part.
I'm literally, look at this kind of stuff I talk about, and it takes a special kind of person. It's really amazing to literally share some of these anecdotes of my life, and for you to be like, yes, and I totally get it. But you're at the highest level of your field and have years and years of experience. Like, how do, for you, for me, for anyone, how do we go from, like, you want to sell this to a company? What do you want to tell the company that will convince them to go through this hard process? And what seals the deal?
Okay, so part of it is, it's a little bit of a relationship business. People want to know you. They want to get a visceral sense that they can't really articulate that they trust you. Mm-hmm. So I think it first starts out with having clean intentions, because we can read each other's intentions. So you talk about transparency and radical candor. I don't think you necessarily have to say a word for people to feel like you're being candid.
My book is the brand marketing in 3 steps: is identity, intention, implementation.
Awesome. I love that.
So you're right. Like, you need to know who you are. Then you need to know that you have to have good, positive intentions.
So sometimes they see I get invited to give a talk, or they saw me give a talk, or they've read something that I've written. So there's some initial quick conversation, and they get it. They get a hit. And one of the things I'm going to tell them is if I'm not the right person, I don't want you to hire me. And so I'm going to do some investigation, because the last thing I want is a dissatisfied client. And strangely, that produces a certain psychological impact where I say, I don't need this job and I don't want it if it's a
Yeah, they
problem. And
want
they
you
say,
more.
okay, they immediately say, you're starting to be the right guy.
Yeah.
And then I say, so probably if you're like any other organization that I've encountered, there's something going on that has nothing to do with your mission that's keeping you from accomplishing your mission as effectively as you want. And that's my job. My mission is to get you back on your mission.
That sounds
And
good
they
to me.
love that. And I'm like,
Yes, I love that too.
and as I don't use the consulting, I say I'm a facilitator, not a consultant, because I'm not going to come into your automotive company and tell you how to make a better catalytic converter. I
You're
don't
not.
have the right. One of the things I've learned as a mediator, the lawyers know more about, they've been living with this case for years. I live with it for a day or two. So what you learn in my profession is how to manifest other people's expertise in a way that it energizes them and makes them feel connected. So a lot of times, like when I was doing recent work for a surgical group, my first question in the individual interviews was, okay, so when you were 5 years old, when somebody said, what do you want to be when you grow up? Did you say a cardiothoracic surgeon or something else? And they were like, oh, I said fireman. And I was like, okay, how did you get to be here? And what do you love about your job? And I bring them back to first principles where they say, huh, interesting. I'm having a hard time this week at work, but I am so privileged to be a cardiothoracic surgeon or whatever. To be my kids are 22 and 24. To be 22, and my daughter is an RBT. She works with autistic kids in their home and in clinics, and she just loves it, right? So to talk with her about the connection she's making with kids that are hard to connect to and the feeling she gets out of that. She likes the pay, but there's something that brought her into that career that is invigorating to her, turns her into just like a person full of light.
Yep.
And I want to find, even in the most burnt out individual, I want to find that original spark, because I want to see if it's there, how do we rekindle it? What do we need to feed to make that happen? And it's true about individuals and it's true about groups of individuals. And I believe and have experienced that it's possible. Now, my organization is such a lovely place. We have about 500 mediators and arbitrators, and we have about 300 and some staff that serve them and make their jobs possible. We did an engagement survey recently, and we were a little upset because in the 3 years since our last engagement survey, our response rate went from like 97 to 95. I was talking to a group that said we struggled to get to 25. We couldn't get 25% of our people to fill out a 10-minute survey. And we were like, okay, we are thinking about revisiting our strategy. And our first goal in the first meeting was we need to create strategy that resonates with every person in this organization, including people who are in the hiring pipeline now. They need to understand why, when they are stocking the refrigerator with a drink for a client, that they are doing something related to strategy. They need to understand that everybody is connected to everything. And I'm privileged to work in an organization that has hardworking people that are not feeling burnout, that are feeling like incredible engagement. Maybe it's also the sense that conflict is a growth industry, and it always has been. But I come from a place of real security and strength. And so I walk into an organization. Sometimes I'm always thinking, how can I get you and your organization a little closer to where we are? Because our turnover rate is minuscule. Our growth is steady and comfortable. I think I project
Basically,
some.
I'm going to conclude for you.
Yep, yep.
You built a highly functioning organization based on incentives, based on empathy, understanding of people, understanding why people should be there. The people that you hired are the right people, and you're applying those same principles to the companies that you work with. Are right?
100%.
And so
100%.
more power to you. I'm going to just clap because
Okay.
the world needs more people like you. It's a complicated world. And I hope that my pathway leads me to a place where I could feel as certain that I feel certain that what I am doing is the right thing, but I am still in a very tumultuous up and down period that hasn't quite evened out yet. I'm on the edge,
Right.
knock on wood, but it would be really great if I could do what I'm doing, do all these interviews, clearly show you that I have value, that is something that people will see this and say, oh, I could hire Richard. I could also hire Jay for something. Like, I want the result of my efforts to lead to Jay's the guy that I need in order to take a complex marketing problem that isn't solved with tactics. And so I'm getting to that point. And the reason why I'm building the Clean Data Alliance and our initiatives is because I wanted to take the principles of marketing that I found to be hollow, that I found to lead to burnout, and say, I don't need to do that for some other person, for some other product that I don't believe in. I'm just going to take those principles and I'm not going to teach people. I'm just going to do it and connect it to the business. That's what I'm doing.
You have a grateful, somebody said when asked me when I became a professor, and I said, it's largely like being self-employed. And they said, so how is that? And I said, it would be great if my boss weren't so hard driving. And you get to be the hard driving boss, but you also get to be the grateful client.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to build. And I really enjoyed our time together. And yeah, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jay, and more power to you. I wish you all the success in the world.